On January 26, 1966, the three Beaumont siblings, Jane, age 9, Arna, 7, and Grant, 4, left their family home in Somerton Park, Adelaide, for a morning at Glenelg Beach. It was a routine outing they had done before, without parental supervision. The children took a short bus ride to the popular beach, planning to be back by midday. Their parents assumed they would be safe and sound, having a fun day at the beach. Sadly, this couldn't be further from the truth. At the beach, multiple witnesses later reported seeing the Beaumont children in the company of an unknown man. One woman described this man as being in his late 30s, around 6 feet tall with a slim build, a thin face, light-colored hair, and a deep tan. He was reportedly wearing swim trunks and playing with the children, who appeared relaxed and happy in his presence. When the children failed to return home at the expected time, their mother, Nancy Beaumont, grew worried. By the evening, after their father, Jim Beaumont, returned, and a search of the neighborhood turned up nothing, the police were notified. An intensive search began that night and continued into the next day. By the morning of January 27th, the three Beaumont children were officially declared missing by police, and a large-scale investigation was underway. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The disappearance of three children in broad daylight from a busy beach shocked Australia. Hundreds of locals volunteered to help search the area, and media coverage spread nationwide as concern grew. Initially, some speculated the children might have simply wandered off or had a misadventure, for example, getting lost or drowning, but there were no clues to support those theories. Their belongings were found neatly left on the beach, and witnesses clearly remembered seeing them with an unknown man, pointing to an abduction scenario rather than an accident. The investigation into the Beaumont children's disappearance quickly became one of the largest in Australian history. Within a few days, authorities had dismissed the possibility of an accidental drowning or other mishap. There was simply no evidence of the children anywhere, leading police to conclude that abduction and likely foul play was the cause. A notable early effort was the draining of the Padawalonga Boat Haven, a nearby holding basin of water, on January 29, 1966. This drastic measure was taken after a woman reported having spoken with three children, matching the Beaumont siblings' description near the haven on the evening they disappeared. Unfortunately, the search of the drained basin yielded no clues, and no trace of the children was found there or in the surrounding areas. Leads poured in as the public flooded police with reports of potential sightings and information. Some witnesses from the beach that day recalled the children saying they were going to buy food. Indeed, investigators later learned that Jane Beaumont had purchased pastries with a $1 note, a bill her parents hadn't given her. This clue eerily suggested the unknown man had given them money, likely in an effort to earn their trust. Despite many tips, no definitive identification of the suspect was made in the initial investigation. A sketch of the blond, athletically built man seen with them was circulated, but it led to no firm arrests. As weeks turned into months, the case went cold, but it never left the public consciousness. In 1968, about 2 years after the disappearance, the Beaumont parents received a series of letters that briefly raised hopes. One letter, purportedly written by 9-year-old Jane, claimed that the trio was safe and being cared for by a man. Another letter, allegedly from the abductor, arranged a meeting for the parents to recover their children. The Beaumonts, accompanied by an undercover detective, went to the appointed meeting place only for no one to show up. It was later revealed that these letters were a cruel hoax. Decades later, police traced them to a man who had been a teenager in 1966 and had written the letters, quote, as a joke. He was identified as a 41-year-old man in 1992 and confessed to the hoax, though he was never charged for it. Over the years, the Beaumont investigation had periodic resurgences with new leads and theories. In the late 1970s and 1980s, police re-examined files to see if the Beaumont case could be connected to other child disappearances. Notably, the disappearance of Joanne Ratcliffe, aged 11, and Kirsty Gordon, 4, from a soccer match at Adelaide Oval in 1973 was scrutinized for links. The circumstances, children taken in daylight from a public place, were eerily similar, and some investigators believed the same perpetrator could be responsible for both crimes. Also, when I was researching this case, this was the first I had heard of the Adelaide Oval case. I actually went off on a tangent and did a write-up for that case, which I'll be featuring in an upcoming episode. Despite these theories, concrete evidence remained elusive. In 2013, on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the case, South Australia police and independent investigators pursued a new tip leading to a dig at a factory site not far from the beach. This new lead suggested the children might have been buried there. The tip came from two men who reported that as boys, around the time of the Beaumont disappearance, they were paid by a local businessman to dig a large hole on that factory property. This businessman would later emerge as a major person of interest, but I'll come back to that shortly. However, after searching the area thoroughly, over the course of a number of years, no evidence turned up. The authorities used everything in their power, including physical digs, and as the technology has advanced, ground-penetrating radar has been used extensively to no avail. That said, the factory site hasn't been officially ruled out, and as you'll see shortly, there's significant circumstantial evidence to corroborate the two men's story. Over the many years of investigation, police have explored numerous suspects and persons of interest. While no one has ever been charged in the Beaumont case, a few individuals have emerged as particularly credible or notorious suspects. Bevan Spencer von Einem, born in 1946, is a convicted likely serial slayer from Adelaide. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1984 for the slaying of a 15-year-old boy, Richard Kelvin. In the 1980s, an informant known only as Mr. B told police an astonishing story. He claimed that von Einem had boasted about having taken 3 children from a beach years earlier. Personally, I had to tap out of reading this informant's account of what happened, and I would strongly suggest you don't go further down that rabbit hole. However, there's significant skepticism about von Einem's involvement, given that he was only 20 years old at the time the Beaumont children disappeared. Further, the victims didn't fit his target profile, and he denied any involvement in the crimes, though there's absolutely no reason to take the word of someone like this at face value. Another suspect is Arthur Stanley Brown, who became a target in the Beaumont case more than 30 years after the children vanished. Brown committed an extremely horrific act against 2 sisters, Judith and Susan McKay, in Queensland in August 1970. This crime occurred 4 years after the Beaumont disappearance and in a different state, but Brown's alleged crimes and profile drew comparisons. Investigators noted that Brown bore a resemblance to the composite sketch of the Beaumont suspect. However, despite these similarities, nothing further has come from this investigative hypothesis. The authorities have released significant information on who they consider to be the most likely perpetrator in the case. Harry Phipps was a wealthy businessman from Adelaide who has come under scrutiny as a potentially key suspect in the Beaumont case. Phipps, who died in 2004, was never officially charged in connection with the disappearance, but several pieces of information that emerged years later have cast him in a suspicious light. Phipps lived near Glenelg Beach in 1966 and was known to be in the area at the time. Notably, his eldest son, Hayden, came forward with disturbing allegations. Hayden claimed that his father was a violent cheddar pile, and strongly suggested that Harry Phipps could have been involved in the abduction of the Beaumont children. Hayden recounted that he saw the Beaumont children at his father's house that day, a claim that, while unverified, brought intense attention to Phipps as a suspect. Further, as discussed earlier, two boys were hired by Harry Phipps to dig a large hole shortly after the Beaumont children vanished. All these factors put together have led investigators to believe that he is likely the prime suspect in their disappearance. I do have to question why the two who were hired by Phipps, as well as his son Hayden, took over 50 years to bring forward their evidence. That said, there's potentially an explanation for this. Notably, they only came forward after Phipps was deceased, indicating that the three may have been terrified of the man well into their adulthood. Despite the array of suspects and theories, authorities have never been able to bring formal charges against anyone for the abduction of the Beaumont children. The case remains officially unsolved, with each suspect ultimately providing more questions than answers. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that notification bell and share this video with 2 people you know. With my channel growing as fast as it is lately, I've set a goal to produce a video every day, so hitting that notification bell ensures you never miss my regular drops. Also, big thanks to new Patreon supporter Will Surrett. The Eastbound Strangler refers to an unidentified serial offender believed to have slain 4 women near Atlantic City, New Jersey in late 2006. The case gets its name from the fact that each victim was found with her head facing east, towards Atlantic City. On November 20th, 2006, 2 women walking near a desolate stretch outside Atlantic City made a grim discovery. They stumbled upon the body of 35-year-old Kim Raffo lying face down in a drainage ditch behind the Golden Key Motel in West Atlantic City. The area around this shallow runoff ditch was a known hangout in a seedy area on the outskirts of the city. When police arrived at the scene, they quickly found 3 more bodies in the same ditch, all within about 50 yards of Raffo's remains. The 4 victims were found fully clothed, except for their shoes and socks, and lying face down in a row, all with their heads oddly turned toward the east. The victims were eventually identified as 4 women who had been involved in paid companionship work in the Atlantic City area. Each had fallen on hard times before their deaths, and all were mothers struggling with personal issues. Barbara Brador, 42, was last seen in October 2006. She was known to have battled multiple substance addictions. By the time her body was found, it was badly decomposed, and investigators could not determine an exact cause of death. Molly Jean Diltz was 20 years old, and originally from Pennsylvania. Diltz was fairly new to Atlantic City. She was the only victim without a known record of SW, though police believe she had recently entered that life. She is thought to have been the first slain, and her remains were so decomposed that her cause of death could not be determined. Kim Raffo, 35, was a former waitress from Brooklyn, New York. Raffo had moved to Atlantic City in 2003 and struggled with substance addiction. She was seen alive just one day before the bodies were discovered. Raffo is strongly believed to have been the last of the 4 victims to die, and unlike the others, her cause of death was clear. She had been strangled with a rope or cord. Tracy Ann Roberts, 23, was a former dancer from Delaware who had only moved to Atlantic City within the past year. In the weeks before her death, she survived an assault by a man who tried to get her to work for him in an illicit capacity. It's unclear whether there's any connection between this event and her subsequent slaying, though the authorities generally don't believe so. Her body showed signs of asphyxiation, indicating she was likely strangled by the perpetrator. All 4 women were found barefoot, with their feet pointing up against the bank of the ditch. Investigators believe the man removed their shoes and used the position of their feet to anchor the bodies in place so they wouldn't wash away in the water. The eerie arrangement of the victims immediately signaled to police that this was a serial crime scene, rather than a dumping ground used by multiple perps. The discovery of 4 slain women just outside a major tourist destination sent shockwaves through the community. In the immediate aftermath, the case commanded intense attention. Over 100 detectives, local and state, were assigned to work on the investigation, and national media descended on Atlantic City. Authorities quickly confirmed that the 4 acts almost certainly met the FBI's definition of a serial offender case. Several persons of interest did emerge in the investigation, though none have been charged, nor have any been definitively linked to the case. One of the first was Terry Olson, a 41-year-old handyman from southern New Jersey. Olson was living at the rundown Golden Key Motel, near where the bodies were found. At the time of the slayings, he was staying in a room free of charge in exchange for doing odd jobs and maintenance work around the property. Shortly after news broke, Olson's girlfriend, with whom he was having a bad breakup, called police and pointed to him as a possible perpetrator. Detectives brought Olson in for hours of intense questioning. A search of his living space turned up tapes that contained disturbing hidden footage of his girlfriend's teenage daughter, for which he was ultimately charged. This discovery made Olson look more suspicious, but crucially, when he provided DNA samples, none of his DNA matched any evidence from the victims. Investigators never found anything directly tying him to the slayings, and Olson was eventually released and is no longer considered a suspect. Another name that surfaced was Eldred Raymond Burchell, a transient man who had nicknamed himself the River Man, in reference to the infamous Gary Ridgway. A local worker, Denise Hill, told police that Burchell spent time with her around 2006 and allegedly confessed to having slain women. Burchell was indeed in Atlantic City during the period the acts took place, but when police attempted to locate him for questioning, he had vanished. His whereabouts remain unknown, and authorities found no hard evidence linking him to the 4 victims aside from the second-hand claim. Like Olson, Burchell has never been formally charged in connection with the case, and has never officially been named a suspect. Investigators also interviewed at least 2 other local men who knew one or more of the victims, but they too were released without charge. To date, no current suspect has been publicly named, and no arrests have ever been made in the Eastbound Strangler case. Over time, several theories have emerged about the identity and motive of the Eastbound Strangler. One of the most widely discussed ideas was a possible connection to the notorious Long Island serial slayer case. The case involved a series of slayings of workers whose remains were found on Gilgo Beach in Long Island from 2010 onwards. Theorists noted the similarities. Multiple female victims, all involved in the same type of work, with their bodies dumped in a coastal area. In late 2010, New Jersey and New York authorities did investigate a possible link between the 2 cases. However, they found no evidence to tie the crimes together and ultimately ruled out any connection at that time. The theory resurfaced in 2023 when a suspect was arrested in the Long Island case. Once again, officials compared details and affirmed that there was no link between the 2 cases. Given that DNA evidence is available in both cases, I have to assume that the DNA evidence simply didn't add up. Another persistent question is why the acts stopped after that cluster of 4 in fall 2006. Serial perps typically continue until caught, so the sudden halt in known victims has led to a number of theories. Some believe the perpetrator may have left the area, been incarcerated for another crime, or even died, which could explain the absence of further incidents. Others have speculated if the eastward positioning of the bodies was symbolic. Certain types of serial slayers believe they are on some sort of mission, generally to rid the world of what they view as quote-unquote corruption. The pointing of the victims toward the neon glow of the casinos has been suggested to cast blame on Atlantic City's vice-based industries. Others have speculated that it had some sort of ritual or occult significance, since they were all pointed towards the sunrise in what could be argued to be a ritualistic manner. These ideas, of course, remain entirely conjecture, without hard proof or even circumstantial evidence. Wendy Abrams Nishikai was a 21-year-old University of California, Berkeley student when she vanished on Halloween night in 1989. For months, authorities searched for Wendy, but no trace of her was found in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance. In February 1990, a grim discovery finally provided a clue. Two local hunters exploring a remote area in Colfax, a small town in Placer County, California, noticed clothing and shoes at the bottom of a steep embankment. This led authorities to human remains later confirmed to be a young woman. The location was over 100 miles from Wendy's home in Berkeley, deep in the Sierra Nevada foothills, indicating that she had somehow ended up far from where she was last seen. Investigators at the time could not identify the body, as forensic technology was limited. They classified the unknown woman as Jane Doe, despite extensive efforts such as examining dental records. With no leads on the victim's identity or the circumstances of her death, the case grew cold as the years passed. In 2023, Placer County authorities formed a cold case investigations unit and reopened the Jane Doe case, applying new genetic genealogy techniques to identify the long unidentified victim. In January 2025, DNA comparisons with family members confirmed that the remains belonged to Wendy, officially solving the 35-year-old mystery of the Jane Doe's identity. With Wendy's identity confirmed, the case has shifted fully into a slaying investigation. The exact circumstances of her death remain unclear, and authorities have not publicly disclosed details about how she died or who might be a suspect. However, officials have made one thing clear: they believe Wendy was the victim of foul play. Now that Wendy has had her identity restored, I'm hopeful that the authorities will be able to make a breakthrough in the investigation. I'm hoping that I'll have an update on this case in the coming months and years.